Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. My next guests are the writers, director, and stars of the upcoming comedy, The Climb, a technically daring, pitch-perfectly written comedy about the ups and downs of a male friendship over the course of a number of years. Please welcome star Judith Godrèche and writers, director, and stars Michael Angelo Covino and Kyle Marvin. Hey, thanks so much for being here.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hi. Director, co-writers, producers together, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
But
Yeah.
it's interchangeable.
Is it really interchangeable? Like on set, where is it basically like your guys' unified vision working together, or how does it work?
No, he was the director. But I think
But he can take credit for it if he wants.
Can I?
Yeah, you can do it, Judith.
Absolutely not.
First and foremost, I love this movie so much. It reminded me, it felt like when I was 15 and I saw Stranger Than Paradise for the first time, or Clerks, and it was like, holy shit, like you could just get a group of people together and make a movie, which is not true. It's deceptive, and those movies were deceptive as well. But I love that feeling of that it just takes a group of people who have a really funny idea and are funny and can make a movie together. So I know that you guys have produced other movies before. This is your first time directing a feature, correct? Yeah. So how did it work that this became the concept that you stuck with, and when did it become that it would be told in chapters, and each chapter would essentially be, not entirely, but essentially be one unbroken shot?
Well, we made a short film that is more or less the opening scene of this movie, which is the two of us riding bikes up a hill. And he's a bit out of shape, and I reveal to him that I slept with his ex-girlfriend. And he starts chasing me, but he's out of shape, so he can't catch me, and it's all one shot. And that went to Sundance, and before we got to Sundance, we sort of knew the significance of that, and we understood that if we had a really solid take on what a longer version of this might be, we might have a chance to make it. So we really focused on that, and I think that's when we came up with this idea for the more elliptical style to the storytelling, where we would sort of live with the characters in almost these vignettes and these 8-minute moments, and then jump forward a year or two and find out what's happened since.
Does when you came up with that vignette idea and those 8-minute moments, does that also help open up what you can do in terms of shooting the movie? Like, you don't necessarily feel as constrained by a linear narrative, and is it somewhat more apologetic for budgetary reasons?
I think for us it was really we gave ourselves that box to play in, and then it became sort of liberating in its own way of like, oh, how do we solve problems now? How do we address storytelling issues? How do we address technical issues of getting through the scenes? So for us, it was one of the constraints we put on ourselves, which then made us it was sort of freeing in a way, because we could live inside the box and figure out our way through it.
Yeah, like if we didn't have the opportunity to fill in the scenes that would normally give you the information, then we had to use economy in the way in which we revealed information in real time with the characters.
You suddenly have an assignment rather than an open-ended thing that you have to try to put together.
Totally.
Yeah. Judith, how did you get involved?
I
It's a Craigslist ad?
I was in touch with, I'm friend with one of the producers of the film, and he randomly said, hey, there's this movie we're producing that we love, and there's the part of a French woman, would you read it? And I was like, yes. And I started reading the script and was basically like texting him while I was reading it. And I was like,
She started texting me. She got my number, and then she said, oh my God, I'm reading the script. I love it.
it was very surprising
and then
for me.
I said, keep reading, you die.
That's actually
That
was actually what the producer said. Ryan was like, just so you know, you're going to die really soon. I don't know at what page you are, but it's soon going to be over. I was like, it doesn't matter, because basically I was reading it, as a movie lover and someone who is always very excited to read anything that is sort of like coming out of the box. And obviously, this movie is very close to the sort of films that I've been working in France, and has a real European taste. And so I was reading the script, and I was like, there's a taste of Nouvelle Vague in this, who wrote this? And like, it was very surprising. And obviously when I met with them, they have, they love French cinema and Claude Sauté and all these directors that I also love. And And I think that there's something very specific about this movie, and which is why I think also it went to Cannes and French people love it so much. It has a tone that is, even though it's an American film and it's obviously very American, but it also has something very particular, which is I think it's reflecting a lot of European culture and French cinema.
Aesthetically, like in the way that it's shot and the way that it's...
Yeah, and it's in the writing. There's something very sort of, first of all, they have a unique voice, which is, when you start reading the script, you're like, wait, there's a voice here. It's not just another cute, nice little cute indie movie. Sometimes there's like some sort of like every indie movie, not every indie movie, but very often there's sort of an edge, but there's a lot of like coffee conversation, lots of scenes happening in bars.
There's always an understandable edge, right? It's like the character, the character is edgy, but then there's this other thing that makes him just nice enough to polish that edge a little bit.
Exactly.
Or if there isn't that thing that makes them nice enough, then they're just the villain in another way.
Yeah,
It's like extremely
and I think
boring.
there's something almost irreverentious. I mean, I don't know if that's a correct word.
Irreverent?
Irreverentious is way better.
Not irreverent, but there's
Coin it.
It's unapologetic. That's what I mean about the climb and the writing and the way it's filmed. And I think that, it's a movie that is making a point. Like those guys are not saying we're sorry to be making this movie. This is our world. This is our voice, and it's sort of like there's a raw thing about it that I think is very European.
Well, even in some of the reviews that I've read that have described it as like a movie about toxic masculinity or a toxic male friendship, I kind of take issue with that, not because I'm toxic, but because I've been like, the movie's not about that. It's not trying to be about toxicity or toxic masculinity. It's about the comedy of these two men and how it's their relationship is funny.
Yeah, I would say it's more about love than toxicity. I mean, I think to have a relationship that volatile that still stays together, it has to be grounded in real love. So I think it's more about that than the toxicity part.
Yeah, I mean, to what Judith is saying, I think the things we love most about French cinema and a lot of European cinema is the romanticism of the messiness of love and the gray area that most of those films thematically live in, and that's something that oftentimes American cinema can use almost as a crutch, meaning the black and white nature of things. Like if we need a character to be bad, we make them cheat. And then everyone knows that they're bad, and then that's it, and we don't have to really explain any further. It's like a very simple way to get everyone in the audience on board with why now the protagonist can go on this other journey because their wife cheated on them, and I think that's a little. I don't want to say it's lazy, but I would say that wasn't what was interesting to us. What was interesting to us was exploring the realities of life, which are people do these things, and the characters have to cope with it because it's not as black and white as I'm never going to speak to this person again.
People do end up being forgiven, and then they make
course.
another mistake later, or somebody else makes a mistake. I think Gail's character is a great example as to that unwillingness to make it black or white, because there's lines about everybody hating her, but in no way is she performed as someone who has animosity or is cruel or is actually trying to ruin Kyle's life in any way.
Well, that's the thing we loved about hearing characters speak about her character, and then it not really being the case. So like, it's like the family's like, she's the worst, or, and then everyone's like, oh, she's terrible. And then you meet her and you get to know her, you're like, or you see her and you're like, no, she's just trying to survive like everyone else. Like, she's not a bad person.
I mean, you got to see the movie. Really, everyone needs to see this movie just to see the striptease dance. Like that's like
why rockabye? What like?
Yeah, if you need a reason to see the movie, he does a striptease.
Yeah,
And it's incredible.
it's incredible.
But it's also like a wonderful like. I don't know. I don't want to reveal too much about myself here, but when you are in love with someone and you're in moments like men do that. Men are like, oh, I'm gonna do the dumbest, silliest, kind of sexy thing, but not at all thing to like impress this person. It's like I've definitely done stupid things like that before.
No, I need
let's
to
be
know.
clear,
I want to know what your stripping song is. Mine's rockabye, so I need to know.
And there's like a playlist of dumb shit that I've put on me, because you always put the song on to immediately have the person go, this song?
That's really funny.
That's really funny.
I also think there's a scene which is with Gail too and Kyle, where I thought, oh, this scene could have been written by a woman, because it's so specifically like what I feel like a woman would ask a man the ability to say no.
To his mother.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And when I saw the film, because obviously when you read a script and then when you actually see the film, you're suddenly discovering another, layer that you had not seen when you had not imagined or pictures when you read it. And I was like, oh my God, this is so what I would have told so many guys. It's so funny that it's actually written by a guy, because this is exactly what, a fantasy of mine, like to get a guy to say no to his mom.
A fantasy of yours?
We were revealing a lot about you.
Judith, you meet a man, you're like, oh, I'm going to get you to say no to your mom. This is going to be hot.
Well, the French are very liberal, so, once you've explored everything else, you have to find other ways.
French women hate mothers. It's crazy. What I also like about that scene with Gail asking Kyle to say no to his mother is that, again, she is not playing that in a cruel way or in a way that is as if his mother is a bad woman or she's trying to separate him from her. It just makes sense that this woman would be like, I need to know that you are like also committed to me, not just your mom.
There's a really interesting thing that we were trying to explore with this idea of like selflessness and selfishness being two sort of polarities of human nature, and selflessness somehow being held on some high pedestal as like the most admirable of traits. And we were sort of looking at that thinking it's also sometimes not admirable. And so let's explore the ways that you putting other people first always is actually damaging as a character and as a way of life. And I think that was something we were trying to explore in that moment too, is like, hey, you need to have some cojones.
Well, because people will end up, I don't think people walk all over him, but he has no agency and nobody knows where he actually stands within a relationship.
To please people, right?
Yeah.
And that, the idea with that scene is like, she just wants him to go tell the family that, I guess I'm giving it.
Don't spoil it.
Right. Yeah. The thing, yeah.
The thing.
It's so interesting that you say that it started as kind of like we had this short, and I guess the short just simply like, we're going to ride bikes up a mountain and this is going to be the dialogue, and you didn't really have any ideas for anything after that until you got accepted to Sundance?
Well, we had ideas, but we, in this industry of like, we're working on, I had another script I had written. I was trying to raise money for to direct, and it was, it's a question of like, you work with what you can and you follow the momentum in a way. So knowing that this short was getting into Sundance, I think we knew the significance of that in terms of that it could be the calling card that would allow us to quickly make a feature.
But there's something about it that feels so deeply felt, both within the characterization and the way that you end up shooting it. It's almost surprising to hear that it was kind of like, we got to try to make a movie because...
Well, I think it was a culmination of a lot of things. We were... It wasn't like we weren't trying to explore things in that way or shoot with that style or do things in that way. It just sort of, we understood these characters and we really set the bar high for ourselves and said, if we don't feel really, really passionate about the story that we're telling and why we're telling it and how we're going to make the film, then we won't go down this road of trying to, turn it into a feature, I guess.
How was it shooting all these chapters in this style? Is it for a director? Was it challenging? Was it difficult? Or
Easy.
Yeah?
No, that was horrible.
How much did you have to allow for things to slip up or for improvisation within the dialogue?
We didn't do a lot of improvisation. We did a lot of rehearsal, and so in the rehearsal we would change the lines and we would tweak them and we would find the way they all came together, but we would have a full day of rehearsal and then a full day of shooting. So it was like a different process than normal indie films where, normally you're marching through the days and you're like, okay, we got to switch and move to this setup. This was really a bit more patient and more thoughtful, where we would, we'd spend a full day rehearsing and getting the rhythm down and the choreography down, and then the next day we'd go for performance.
You do 1 day per scene?
That's it.
So 2 days per scene.
2 days per scene.
No,
one rehearsal day and
of
one shoot day.
That's it. And which was crazy because on that second day when we were going, it was like we start in the morning, we end at the end of this day, and we have to get a 12-minute perfect take in. So, and we would just do take after take after take, and it eventually would just became like a athletic, like a championship game where no one wanted to be the one to mess up.
Yeah.
So everyone was there was like this insane focus on set, both from all of our crew and all of our talent, where it was like, we have to get this. This is the only time we've got, so everyone needs to be there.
Yeah, it was stressful.
You have one day to do it. How much prior to even rehearsal did you know going into that shoot exactly how you were going to shoot around that location? How did you find these locations, and like how long did you plan what the setups were going to be?
I mean, a lot of stuff was on the page, and then we would try to find locations that would fit that. So like
You had technical stuff on the page?
everything visual was on the page pretty much.
We wrote the film knowing we were going into production, and he was directing. So for us, it gave us a really unique position to be specific in
like
what.
the Christmas scene, for instance. There's like this shot that stays outside the house as my character goes in. That was a very intentional thing on the page, and I think the idea was just to, we're about to spend, a full Thanksgiving scene with this whole family, and then a full Christmas scene, and it would feel very repetitive to be sort of shooting it the same way. But also, my character was very much an outsider to their family, so there was like this. We really wanted to allow the camera to add perspective and sort of add to the story in ways, and that was one of the ways we could.
And luckily, we partnered up with Zach Huberstein, who's an amazing DP a cinematographer who came on to sort of take that vision and expand upon it and put the technical pieces together to help support Mike's vision.
Yeah, like we had ideas and then had no idea how to execute it.
Really?
Oh yeah, we'd be like, oh okay, well, I want to do this. I'd be like, Zach, how do we do this? And because like even in that Christmas scene alone, it starts handheld.
Right.
It without cutting switches to a dolly, moves around the house as a dolly, and then they built this electromagnet rig, and then they would turn off the magnet, it would drop onto his shoulder, and then it would go into handheld again and go inside the house.
How did you know? I mean, when you were in rehearsal, did you ever see like, oh shoot, like the way that I planned to shoot this part of this shot doesn't actually match well with this scene of dialogue? How do I switch this up? Or did you generally find during rehearsals that what you had scripted on the page and what you thought would work was going to work?
Yeah, there were a couple times where we had to switch it up completely. Like there's this scene in the cabin where Gail and I have this like confrontation. Where Marissa and I have this confrontation, and that was initially scripted to just be face to face in one room. And it just felt like stale. And then we started talking about like, okay, if we could do anything, what would you do? And I was like, well, I would leave the room. She's like, great, I would follow you. And then it turned into this crazy chase scene that became
Wrestling
physical
match.
and a wrestling match. And like, it became this like physical showdown that really elevated the film in a place where maybe dialogue wouldn't have been sufficient. But that was sort of trusting, the talented people that we hired, like, the actors and to bring their art and their
also,
creativity.
once again, gave her more and rounded out the idea of this character. As you talked about before, everybody has a perception of her, but the audience's perception of her is completely different, and that scene helps that.
Totally.
Yeah. What did Gail think of everybody's perception of her character? I'm curious, because everybody in every scene says she sucks.
She loved it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, she's the one who kind of doubled down, giving us the confidence to lean into some of the things we wrote into the script. Meaning, there's a version of this where it feels a little convenient that like she flips things on their head and like where we have this showdown and maybe almost do something together. And it's like, they're like, she makes these really like these choices in the movie where you're like, oh, would she do that? That's really dark. That's an interesting choice to make, like, for a character. And I think she rooted that in a level of like understanding. She just understood why the character would do that and conveyed to us that she's like, no, trust me, this girl would do this. And I was like, all right.
Really?
Yeah. She was.
And is that meant? And I don't want to give anything away, but is it meant at the end of the day to be ambiguous as to what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Yeah,
I think
I'm wondering if I missed something.
the beauty of great movies is where you get done and you're like, wait, and the two people in the audience sitting next to each other have differing opinions about nuanced things inside the story. So I think we left it like that because
It's unclear whether Marissa and my character slept together.
Okay. And I want to go back to this idea of the movie being about male friendship or toxic masculinity. We had someone here a couple of days ago who was talking about how every time she makes a movie, suddenly the woman represents all women in this country. And if she makes a movie about men, it's supposed to be my idea about all men. And when you guys made this movie, were you trying to explore ideas of male friendship? Or for you, in writing it, was it just like, this is a story about these two men?
I think we were trying to explore friendship. That was the point in which we set out. We happened to be men, and that happened to be the context of the story. But I think we dipped into all experiences of friendship, and that I think was the focus for us, was adult friendships and the complexity and gray area that is contemporary relationships for us.
Do you feel like you've created two characters that you want to take into many other adventure, like it's
multiverse?
Gonna be like, yeah, exactly. Like it's gonna be like Jacques Tati.
Well, it's definitely a multiverse situation, and we will do a sequel, but the sequel will have to be in like 8 years or something.
Can I
reprise?
come back from?
I mean, maybe we can.
I don't know. I like
we could do a prequel.
I like the idea of Mike going on a French bike trip by himself and meeting people and experiencing things.
Yeah, we could. I mean, if we were to do a prequel, we could definitely do it now. But I think the sequel will have to wait for us to get a little older.
And I want to see Kyle as like the single 35-year-old man that he is now, or 40-year-old guy, and like living
with my son.
Yeah, trying to live a single life as a 40-year-old guy.
Totally.
We have a question from Twitter. It's what was your favorite moment or memory from working on The Climb?
Judith,
there you
what
go.
was your favorite moment?
Wait, I'm always really bad with question that involves the word favorite.
That is the best excuse for not answering a question.
Most memorable moment?
Memorable moment.
What is it? I think it's it's driving from New York to the location where we shot with those two guys in the car, and sort of coming up with the craziest sentences in French, like, and what they mean in English, and like a line about like pooping or pooing. Or
Is that what that line was? No, there's like because we were
we were
like
sort of like thinking of like things I could say in French and how they like the translation is weird.
I was making sure that everything we had written in French was like connecting and wouldn't fall flat on the other side. So we were like adjusting her exclamations and dialogue, because there's this sort of lost in translation thing happening throughout that scene. That the original version of that scene is much longer, and it like continues on and on.
What was the most memorable moment for the two of you?
I think for me, probably the bike scene on the hill. That was the second scene we shot, and it was sort of the moment where I was like, we either are going to mess this whole movie up or we'll get this take.
What was the first scene that you shot?
We shot the cemetery scene first.
And then we flew to France the next day. And we were in the south of France. That was pretty memorable. And I just remember, we had this
food poisoning, and it was.
I had eaten like some bad food, and but they had this electric tracking cart, and it was like supposed to go up the hill, and they're like, yeah, don't worry, it can go all day. And then we get there, and it's going like 2 miles.
The hill was
too steep, and it was just creeping up the hill. And then all the crew's out trying to push it, and we were all like, okay, what do we do? Like how do we shoot this movie without a vehicle that has the power to get up the hill?
What did you do?
We put it back on the process trailer that it had been like the trailer that it was towed there on. So like the big truck and trailer that it was towed on, and then just literally put the camera cart on there with the jib arm and the whole thing.
All the operators.
And then the people just sat around it, and it actually worked out great, but it was frightening for a while.
So the funeral scene was what you shot first, because the funeral scene for me was when, for whatever reason, I think because the actual climb on the bikes, it's very obvious why the camera is tracking that way and how we're following the action. But that opening shot of the funeral scene, I mean, it's all one shot, but that first movement where we dolly this way, and then kind of don't even just dolly back. You kind of end up coming around a little bit.
Pull him in.
Yeah, I thought that was so beautiful, and that was when everything started to click for me technically about what you were doing. How did you guys not know that you had the movie after that?
That was frightening. I mean, he knew, I didn't.
I was well. What happened is we got done with that thing, and I was like, okay, we got the scene in that. It was so hot. It was like sweaty and hot and challenging, and we got it. And I was like, oh, there's a take in there that I feel like we have it. So I felt really comfortable, and definitely all of the people who were giving us money and were watching us were like, okay, good, you guys can do this.
This is working.
Yeah.
Well, they were quite frightened because they're like, we saw this short. We have no idea if you guys can make a movie. And then they got on set for the first day, and it was this really challenging scene where I had to, like, probably my most emotional scene, but also I had to be like directing and acting in that scene, and like grieving the loss of this person I love, and we got through it, and I had no idea. I was like, we probably ruined the film, but everyone was like, no, it's good.
You walked over to the financiers and you're like, probably sucks. I don't know, guys. Sorry.
No, to them, I was like, we're getting on a plane to France tomorrow. Did the wire go through?
Wow. But you saw it and you knew that it worked. But I mean, that's crazy. Did they, at any point, even though I'm sure you conveyed exactly how you were going to shoot the movie to these people, at any point were they like, are you sure you don't want to just get some coverage?
That first day literally was said. Yeah. Every day.
Single time.
Really?
Well, yeah. Anytime we were like, they were like, oh, it's great. We've got 3 more hours. Let's get coverage. It would be like, oh, you nailed it. It would be midday. They'd be like, that take is great. We know that that's great.
Why don't we push in on
you should get coverage for safety.
And how did you respond to that?
No.
We literally have no coverage. We don't have coverage on any of our.
We knew if we shot coverage, we would end up using it, or there would be this pressure to use it. And I hadn't conceived how I would want to use coverage other than like putting these limitations of saying, no, if we force ourselves to do this, there's no going back.
And how did you feel? I mean, of course you would use coverage because once you get into the editing room, things start slowing down, or there's beats that are a little bit slower than you had anticipated. Right. Oh, you can cut around that. But that's part of what works about the movie and what is so wonderful is that you have to sit with these uncomfortable, awkward beats at times.
Yeah, it was like these constraints that we knew that it would force us to be patient with the film in ways that contemporary cinema we often don't get the chance because there's so much pressure to not bore people. And we thought like there's something that gets uncovered when you're patient, especially with comedy.
Yes.
That when you don't have a joke every 20 seconds, like sometimes different jokes come out that wouldn't come out otherwise, and it's more fulfilling. And that was a really exciting thing for us to explore that we really wanted to handcuff ourselves to.
There's also a slight allowance too. The jokes feel better, right? Like there isn't as much, all the jokes are great, but there isn't as much pressure on the jokes being kind of like the greatest written joke by the greatest comedy writer possible, you know?
Yeah, totally. It was sort of our thing that like we would throw away jokes. Like we would write jokes and we'd be like, nah, throw it away. Because it
push it down in the mix.
Yeah, push it down and get it off. Yeah, because the priority for us was always the emotional journey, and we felt like if we got that down, then the comedy that we knew and the comedy that we had written would come through.
Right. What's often funny about the movie is not a joke. It's actually the way that these guys behave around each other and the physical manifestations of who they are a lot of the time. Guys, I don't know if I said it enough, but I love the movie so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here and talking to me about it and making it. How can people see The Climb? When are they going to see it?
It is in theaters on March 20th in New York and LA, and then it goes nationwide the following week. So
well, it's amazing. Congratulations. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Of course.